Thank you for clicking on this video. My name's Tom, and today we are going to be installing an in-tank fuel pump on this old 911 tank. Stay tuned.
Garage time.
I'm putting water in the tank to try to purge any of the fumes that might be explosive. The water actually displaces those fumes, prevents it from blowing up. If you are considering modifying your tank, please, please, please be careful. It's a highly dangerous task to do. You're dealing with fuel and tanks that can explode, and please do your own research. My tanks have been sitting a long time. It's pretty low risk, but I did take precautions, and you need to research your precautions too. Be safe. Okay, you might be wondering, why am I going through so much work to put the fuel pump inside the tank? Well, there's three reasons. Number one is to reduce the inlet restriction on the fuel pump. This will reduce cavitation. Number two is the fuel pump will run cooler when it's inside the tank. It has fuel sloshing around, it just keeps the motor cooler. Number three is to make it run quieter. It's going to be a little bit muffled, a little reduced sound when it's inside the tank. You guys know I love Porsche, but sometimes they just didn't get it right. It was a bad idea in the 70s when they put the fuel pump in the rear of the car, but it's even worse today because fuels have changed as well. Okay, today's fuels are blended with ethanol, and that changes the chemical makeup of the gas. It actually lowers the boiling point a little bit, and it makes the fuel system a little bit more sensitive to heat, which is why Porsche never should have put the fuel pump in the back. I don't know why they're trying to add more weight to the back anyways. But also the inlet restriction. So when the fuel has to go through a negative pressure to get to the fuel pump with all those restrictions in the tank and the filters, and then going through the tunnel and all the restrictions there, that causes a reduced pressure on the inlet. And when you have a low boiling point on the fuel, it starts to cavitate, which means it's localized, bubbling of the fuel, and then that gets pumped up into the engine. And with fuel injection, it's really difficult to have fuel injectors that work correctly if there's aeration in the fuel. So with a carburetor, maybe it's not such a big deal because there's float bowls, the bowls are vented and stuff. Maybe the bubbles get a chance to get out of the system before it goes in the engine. But with EFI, you need a clean supply of fuel. And so that's really the primary reason why I'm moving it to the tank. Obviously, when you submerge the fuel pump, it has much less restrictions, so it's less likely to cavitate. Now, the other issue is, how do you prevent fuel from sloshing around? Because if it gets air bubbles in the tank and you suck up an air bubble, well, then it's going to cavitate with the ethanol even more. The purpose of this pot is to do two things. One, it's to create a baffle so that when fuel is sloshing around, if I'm going left or right, fuel is going to be sloshing around. Now, some of that's prevented by this baffle right here. This goes lengthwise across the tank, but you also have the inlet here, and you don't want the inlet to get air bubbles sucked into it for the reasons I just mentioned earlier. The pump will cavitate, cause aeration in the fuel lines, and your engine won't run right. So this creates a little pot where even if the fuel sloshes around in here, it can't go anywhere. It can't get out because this hole is very small and it's got this baffle in here. So the fuel is going to stay in here. It's going to get sucked up by the engine. Even if you're cornering hard, braking hard, accelerating hard, this is a good design. And then the scroll portion of it is designed so that when the fuel is returned from the engine, it's reintroduced low to the tank, and it comes in a long path here all the way around the sides until it hits this baffle, and that gives the fuel a chance, if there's any air bubbles in it, it allows those air bubbles to become larger and then escape the system before it gets sucked back in the intake. So this is cool, but I do have a couple questions. So if you look at the height of this pot, it's about 3 or 4 inches high, and makes me wonder, you know, how does the fuel get in here anyways? Obviously when the tank is full, it's going to enter in through the top. But as you start to use fuel and the tank is almost empty, then there's no way for fuel to get inside this pot. Or you might say the fuel is being returned by this line, which is true, but it's an internal combustion engine. It's pulling more fuel and consuming more fuel than it's returning. So if you don't get fuel coming in from the top, you're consuming more fuel than you're returning, then this is going to empty. This is going to go out when you're driving the car. So that means once the fuel level of the tank gets to the top of this, you're done. You're out of fuel and there's no way to reintroduce fuel back into this tank. That means that this is all wasted space. From here to here, it's wasted space. Yeah, here's the fuel sender, or what's left of it. It's supposed to have a shroud on here, but I wanted to show you how far it extends into the tank. So when it's all the way empty, this is empty in this case because the tank is upside down, there's still a few inches, probably 3 inches of space that's not registered on the gauge. So this means even if there's fuel in the tank, you can't use it unless it somehow splashes into the top of that swirl pot. I do like the design of this swirl pot for the return of the fuel. So if I can, I may relocate this and use it again in the car. But the fuel pump won't go down inside here and the hole's too small. So it's better to separate both. I'll have a fuel return pot and then a baffling system on the inlet side that's going to allow fuel to get in without sloshing around and sloshing out. Most of the big ugly dents are taken out of this bottom portion of the tank. Still a little work to do here on the front edge of the tank. It's also crushed down. Inside the tank here, I want to plan where I want to attach the fuel pump, or at least the access hole for the fuel pump. I think this area here will be nice and strong to add a flanged area, just like it's done here for the fuel sender. So I'm thinking about sort of an oval shaped cutout here. You can see there's a change in shape of the tank right here. So I'm going to be putting an emboss on this, and I don't want to go too far into that flat portion of the tank. Okay, I've been messing around with these templates. I just made these on my computer real quick, and I want to make sure that I can get my hand inside the tank. So I printed this out. This is basically the shape, just computerized, and I can get my hand just barely through this hole. So if I need to fish down in the bottom of the tank and inspect it later, I can get my hand inside the tank, which is nice. That's this. And then this is the other version of it, which has some holes in it. This is the flange width that'll go right here. So I like the way it looks. It's in the position that I want it to be in. So it's a little bit offset. You know, this is not perfectly flat, and so there's a little bit of a gap right here. This will be a little tricky to weld. And then over here, there's also a little bit of gap as it gets into this curvature. I need to let this cool down. It's getting a little bit of heat into it now. You know, this is a sealing surface, so it needs to be really flat. You'll also notice that I cleaned up the outside of this racetrack, but the inside is still really rough. And I did that because I think it's going to be easier to clean it up after it's welded in. It's looking much more uniform now. As you can see, it's coming together. You can kind of get an idea of the retrofit kit here. The fuel pump is going to drop in from the top. It's going to get mounted to that flange. And then at the bottom, it's now time to think about what can we do at the bottom to prevent the fuel pump from starving for fuel. I'm probably going to reuse this for the return of the fuel, but for the pickup, I'm going to make my own system. Okay, I clearly ran into limitations on the brake. The tooling height was not good enough to make a complete box, but I got it started. If you're interested in how I made that brake, or if you want to learn more about it, click this video right here. Yay, I made a box. How does the fuel get into the box? For that, we're going to use a series of check valves located near the bottom of the box. That way there, fuel can flow in, but it can't flow out in case of a turn or acceleration or deceleration. All right, the key to this little contraption with the check valves is this plastic ball. It's actually nylon. This stuff works with fuels, even E85 fuels. It actually expands the plastic a little bit, but there's no stress on the ball. And then this is a tube sleeve, kind of like I used for the flared line fittings. It has a chamfer in there, and this ball sort of fits in that chamfer, and that's going to create a check valve. So fuel can come this way, and then this ball will be inside a tube. I'll show you in a minute. But this ball, when the fuel tries to go out, it's going to have to go around the ball, and eventually the ball is going to create a seal. Okay, here's a close look at this contraption and how it's supposed to work. This is just a standard tube with 4 holes drilled in it. That's for the fuel flow. And then it has this tube sleeve and also this nylon ball. So the nylon ball goes inside the tube there, and then this cotter pin goes through these 2 small holes. And now the ball is captive inside the tube. Okay, these check valves have been welded in, and I made this cover on the top. Now it has a circle on it. That's where the fuel pump is going to drop in from the top. The whole goal of this box is to keep fuel around the fuel pump. Let me show you. The box is empty at the moment. When it goes in the fluid, the fuel is going through the check valves and filling the box. Now when I lift it out, the fuel is mostly staying in. So even though this leaks, that's okay. It doesn't need to be completely fuel-proof or watertight. If I was to take a hard turn like this direction, the fuel will not come out of the box. It's leaking out of these seams because it's not fully welded, and that's okay too. That's been over a minute now of, shaking it around, and there's still lots of water in here. Amazeballs. This will all drop down together with the fuel pump. This goes in the box, this comes right on top, and then it secures down with some nuts. Now, that's the reason why I made the hole big enough in the fuel tank so that I can reach down with some tools and put these nuts on. What else can we do to this fuel tank? I'm not going to need this filler tube because if you remember from way back when, I deleted the fuel filler flap on my body of the car. So I need to put fuel in from inside the trunk area, and so that fuel needs to go in right here. I'm not going to be doing the large fuel center mount inlet in the hood. So a lot of people drill the hole in the hood, and that's useful for, like endurance racing. You come in for a pit stops, you can fuel the car from either side, and it's like a huge inlet, like a 4-inch round inlet, so you can dump fuel in right away. I'm not going to be doing that to my car. I like the cleaner look without the big filler hole. I deleted the fender hole for a reason too. So for me, and the type of use I'm going to be doing with this car, I'm totally fine with a regular gas station pump and lifting the hood to put fuel in. And I found this part. This is from eBay. It's for a Harley Davidson, and this is for the gas tank. Now, I'm using this because it's important that the fuel shuts off. When you're putting fuel right into the tank, the gas station pumps have a sensor on the end. It's a little hole, that senses the pressure in the filler neck. And these holes and these vents and stuff are required to generate pressure in the filler neck as you're filling up. So as it's full, the gas tank will shut off, or the fuel pump will shut off. Well, nothing in this fuel system is stock, not even the gas cap. If you haven't seen the video on the custom stainless fuel lines, that's a great video. Check it out right here. It's really important to change those plastic fuel lines that run in your car. You could risk a burst line or a failure inside the tunnel. Also, the video a lot of people like is the video when I filled in the gas cap filler. Speaking of the gas cap, there's a video where I welded that fender portion shut along with a bunch of other holes in my car. So please check those out. If you are interested in doing some of the modifications I've done, I'm going to be putting together a post on Patreon with all the part numbers, all the templates, all the goodies that you will need to do something like this. That's available on Patreon. A lot more details over there, so please check it out. Take care, guys.